The president is again resorting to a verbal assault against his own top health experts in the waning days of the campaign. Mr. Trump called Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, a, quote, disaster. He also claimed people are, quote, pandemicked out. Despite the president's rhetoric, Dr. Fauci is warning Americans the threat from coronavirus is far from over. CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reed reports on the president's latest attacks.
Biden wants to lock it down. He wants to listen to Dr. Fauci.
On the campaign trail Monday, President Trump attacked Dr. Anthony Fauci almost as often as he did his opponent.
He loves being on television, and we let him do it. Sometimes he says things that are a little bit off.
Earlier, on a call with campaign staff, the president unloaded on the nation's top infectious disease expert and other scientists.
People are tired of hearing Fauci and all these idiots, these people that have gotten it wrong. Fauci's a nice guy. He's been here for 500 years. Every time he goes on television, there's always a bomb, but there's a bigger bomb if you fire him. But Fauci's a disaster.
But Mr. Trump's attacks came after Fauci spoke to 60 Minutes and criticized what he said was a super spreader event at the White House last month.
I was worried that he was going to get sick when I saw him in a completely precarious situation of crowded, no separation between people, and almost nobody wearing a mask. When I saw that on TV, I said, oh my goodness. Nothing good can come out of that. That's got to be a problem.
In an interview on Monday, Fauci said the war of words distracts from the battle against COVID.
What we're trying to do is to protect the health and the welfare and the safety of the American people.
The president continues to hold packed rallies despite cases rising across the country.
People are pandemicked out. You know that? They're pandemicked out.
Fauci warns that worse days could be ahead and that we need to follow the science.
If things don't turn around and change as we get into the cool months of the fall and the cold months of the winter, that we may be headed into some really more serious issues than we've experienced.
Former Vice President Joe Biden issued a statement in response to the president's attacks. In it, he wrote, "The American people are tired. They're tired of your lies about the virus. They're tired of watching more Americans die and more people lose their jobs because you refuse to take this pandemic seriously." Paula Reed, CBS News, the White House.
And for more on this, I want to bring in Joel Payne. He is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Welcome, Joel. Great to have you with us. So I first want to ask you about the Supreme Court ruling allowing Pennsylvania to accept mail-in ballots up to 3 days after Election Day. We know Pennsylvania is a key state. Everyone will be watching election night. Our CBS News Battleground Tracker currently has it leaning toward Biden. So how much of an impact could this ruling have?
Look, it certainly will have an impact. Anything that expands access to voting, expands access to people having their ballots counted, I think is a good thing for democracy. And I'd hope that both Democrats and Republicans could agree on that. I think that, what we've seen here in Pennsylvania is what we've seen around the country, which is a real market effort by local officials to make it easier to vote, particularly with the current coronavirus crisis that we're in. I, for one, just as somebody who wants to make sure access to voting and to people having access to safe voting is expanded, I'd love to see this replicated around the country. But I certainly think this will be viewed politically as a victory for the Biden team and probably a little bit of a disappointment for the Trump team.
So, Joel, the president says he's tired of talking about the coronavirus, and Americans are clearly fatigued themselves. but how could we see his recent attacks, the president's recent attacks on Dr. Fauci? Could they backfire for him?
Well, see, I think the president's just on the wrong side of this, and on a number of issues, right? Number one, you have a lot of Americans, particularly seniors, who are really concerned about the reaction to coronavirus and to the threat that we're still under. Tony Fauci is a very trusted public voice. We know, based on public opinion polling, he's one of the highest rated public officials in terms of trust and in terms of belief in what he is saying versus the president, where there's lower trust. So just on that effect alone, I think the president's on the wrong side of this. Also, just given the fact that this is the president's own, internal apparatus. And so I think it speaks something to whether or not the president has a plan where everybody's on the same page. And finally, what I would say is any day that the president is talking about coronavirus is a bad day for him politically. So advancing this story, advancing this narrative of him having a war of words with his top infectious disease expert, that's a negative for the president because it's another day he has to talk about coronavirus. And I'd imagine his campaign officials would rather him not do that.
All right, so Joel, let's talk about the changes in the next presidential debate. How is this mute option going to work? And can we expect this to create a less chaotic debate than the one we all endured last time?
Well, I bet you it'll be a better viewing experience for us here at home trying to figure out what the two candidates are saying. I think this is going to be good for both candidates, actually, in a lot of ways. Look, Donald Trump did himself no favors by continually interrupting Joe Biden. For one, because a lot of people on the Trump campaign would probably have liked for Joe Biden to have to give fuller answers on some of those thornier, tougher issues. So really and truly, if the president really views this in the way that he should, this should be viewed as a positive to allow for a fair hearing from both sides about their views on the issues. And I'm sure there are issues, by the way, that the president and his team would love to have a full, uninterrupted debate with Joe Biden about. I think this will promote that. And I think ultimately this can be a good thing for both campaigns.
Right, and this debate will be the second and final time we will see President Trump and Joe Biden square off before Election Day. So let's talk about some of the topics that they will be asked and how it might sway those few undecideds out there. I mean, at this point, there are still some undecideds, right, Joel?
Allegedly, there are people who still haven't made up their mind yet. And I think, you really don't want to look at it nationally. You want to look at it in the states, in the key battleground states, in places like Wisconsin, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, et cetera. Those are the places where you're looking at the undecideds, and there are numbers in the margins that can make a difference in a close race. We know that Michigan, Wisconsin, and Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania were all decided by less than 1 percentage point last time. So if you can sway 2 to 3% of the vote at this late stage in a race, I think it can be to your advantage. And I think that this debate coming up on Thursday night will be the president's last opportunity to draw those contrasts with Joe Biden and maybe create some doubt in some of those voters.
Right. And it's interesting that, they will be talking about climate change, race in America, fighting COVID-19. I don't know how you can avoid that topic, and national security. So it will be really interesting to see both of these candidates take on some of these very thorny issues.
Yeah, and I know Ed in his package that you shared before this talked about that being at issue, right? That the Trump campaign really didn't want to talk about fighting COVID again. They wanted to focus on foreign policy. Well, look, obviously, I think that's probably footing that the president feels more comfortable on. And again, to my point earlier, the less he can talk about coronavirus on a national stage with Joe Biden, the better it is for the president. So I do think that is something that the president and his team will try to mitigate. But I also think that this is fraught with some concern for Joe Biden. I mean, look, there are some thorny issues on climate change and fracking, things of that nature. There's some issues regarding national security that I'm sure the president feels like he has an advantage on. So, again, I think there's opportunities for both candidates to make inroads here.
We will definitely be watching closely. All right. Well, Joel Payne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.